The world is full of languages and dialects, but many don't work on the internet, where English and just a handful of the other thousands of languages dominate. To understand what that means in practical terms, it helps to imagine that even if your keyboard can type words in English, the platform you're trying to use might not recognize what you're typing. And this is just one example of how the internet doesn't work the same way for everyone. I'm Jennifer Strong, and this is Shift.
Now here on the steering column is a device called Auto Cruise. You simply set the speed you want.
Self-driving robo-taxis are already on the road in two U.S. cities.
As the disc rotates, a mirror reflects the light in the way that depends on how the signal was recorded.
This is the 100 terabyte. I present to you Electro, the Moto Man.
Ladies and gentlemen.
I would say that one of my greatest skills is my ability to interact with humans.
In the second of a two-part series, we meet people fighting to build and protect an open internet.
Okay, so there's a very personal story to this. I am from Iran, and in Iran, we struggled with access to information, both accurate information internally, like nationally, and also to get our voice heard internationally before the internet became popular and accessible. My name is Farzaneh Badiei. I'm the founder of Digital Medusa, which is to protect the values of the internet and keep it global and interoperable. So before the internet, the magazines that we could have access to that were from outside, they were censored. And I remember when they, like at the airport, when people would bring like magazines that like Vogue and fashion magazines, but also news, they would like have these markers and they would go over the magazines and just redact issues that they thought was against their own morals. Of course, the airport official. And, the internet brought us a platform that was unprecedented. And not only for some time we didn't face that kind of censorship on the internet, we also got our voice heard globally. So people could have access to what Iranians had in mind. And it wasn't like the government representatives or people that claimed that they were our representatives, but it was just ordinary people.
It's a common problem across technologies. You focus on the issues that the technology has brought, and you don't focus on the advantages that it brings. I am Andrew Sullivan. I'm president and CEO of the Internet Society. The internet is a transformative technology that brings us so many advantages. And when I say us, I mean all of us, because that's the other thing about many of the people who are attempting to control the internet. Many of the people who are trying to control the internet have an interest in you not having control, but in them having control. The advantage to somebody who is wealthy and powerful and so on of an older media landscape in which just any random person couldn't broadcast their views is that you can have gatekeepers, and gatekeepers are susceptible to control. The internet is not really susceptible to that, and I think that is part of our discomfort with some of the ways in which it has developed. Not only that there are negative consequences from some of the things that people do with the internet, and there definitely are, and I'm not trying to dismiss that, but it's also the case that some of the things that people are doing with this make the status quo uncomfortable. And that's, from my point of view, that is one of the advantages that the internet brings us. It lets us uncover many of the things that perhaps have been unstated for too long. And that allows our society to try to address those things because people who don't have, or formerly didn't have a voice, now can make their voice heard over the internet. Some voices maybe are ones that I don't want to hear over the internet, but I am prepared to deal with the idea that we're going to have to cope with some pretty hateful speech online if it also means that people who have had their speech suppressed for years and years because, they were a minority group that nobody wanted to listen to, that they get a voice too. And I think that that's an advantage that the internet brings us.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the internet in many ways is a game changer, is something that changed the world. Hi, I'm Jon von Tetzchner. I'm the CEO of Vivaldi and co-founder. And in a previous life, I was co-founder and CEO of Opera. I've been there from the very beginning, not the ARPANET and all that, but from the World Wide Web, which I think for most people is what the internet is. We came across the web in 1992, started working with it, built kind of an intranet site before that even existed, did all kinds of technology development, and then we started building the browser. And that's where my company came from, my first one, Opera. And my thinking from the very beginning has been, okay, getting people onto the internet is good. Getting people equal access to information and services is good. Now we do see certain issues that we need to deal with, but I mean, that's where I'm coming from, that basically the internet is force for good.
The internet, it doesn't inherently have these values, but when they were building the internet, engineers and the policymakers, they create something that is global. The access to the internet is not based on your nationality or creed or gender. And it was a whole different perception than what we have in the world, which is a lot of like territories and you need to get visas to go to different places. So the internet had this, in my opinion, they created something that kind of breached those borders and provided a space that everybody could connect, regardless of who they were.
We already have a divided internet where people have different content. But I mean, we have divided internet even inside like the US and people live on different planets because they have access to different information and the algorithms put us into different groups, and depending on which groups we belong to, we get different information. So that's, to me, a bigger problem than basically the other issues which are separate. I mean, we need to start fixing things at home and be at the forefront of trying to keep everyone safe. And then we can look at, yes, there are certain countries where they're kind of reducing access to information and the like, which is a significant problem. But I really think we need to solve the algorithm issue where bad algorithms are being written and they're using data in an unethical way.
One thing that is very important, and we take it for granted, is connectivity and online presence. So one of the things that in internet governance lingo we keep talking about is internet fragmentation. And for me, when I want to tell people what it is that we need to stop internet fragmentation so that in the future, anywhere in this world, when you have access to that infrastructure, we can keep it global and we can also have cross-border data flow and cross-border information, so that we also prevent it from being territorialized. I sometimes argue that now, after COVID, we have showed over and over that the internet is not just a means of communication anymore. People use the internet to live their lives and have access to essential services. So one of the things that we need to do in the technical community for the people not to take it for granted is to tell them what functionalities they cannot access when they use the internet every day if we don't protect and defend the internet in the long term.
I want to be clear about this. The internet has never really been the same everywhere. It's not been completely smooth, right? Your printer is probably not really connected to the internet, and that's probably a good thing, because just imagine the kind of spam you would get if your printer was spewing out all the time. But what you don't want to have is an internet where fundamentally what you can see and what you can experience and so on is basically different depending on who you are and where you are and when it is. And I think that that's a risk that we are facing. And I also think we're sleepwalking into it. I don't think people are thinking about this. Instead, they're looking at it and they're saying, this is a particular problem. I want to solve this particular problem. And each one of those things adds a little bit to the fragmentation of the internet. Eventually, you fragment it enough, you don't have the internet at all.
Basically what we have here, we have the Empire Strikes Back in some ways. I mean, I think we've had many years of very positive progress, right? And now certain companies did some bad moves. and certain governments maybe took advantage of it as well. And that's something that we need to fix. And I think it's possible to fix this, but I mean, we need the regulation to fix the problems that we have. We can't have the internet as a battlefield. It shouldn't be a battlefield of opinions. It should basically be, this is a place where we can go and hang out with our friends. It shouldn't be, what kind of manipulation are we dealing with at this time? So we need to get back to where we were about 10 years ago on the internet, where the feeling was things are moving overall in the right direction. Things are the world is moving in the right direction, and the internet is actually a part of that instead of all this level of data collection and being misused. I mean, we have to make sure it doesn't go in the wrong direction, and there is a risk that it continues to go in the wrong direction until we actually just decide we want to fix this.
This has been on my mind, and I see it more and more. I see it, and it is very worrisome. Internet community that is working on trust and safety related issues, like content and conduct of the users on social platforms, on the internet, they and the policymakers that belong to that community, the regulators, they don't talk and use the experiences of the community that works on infrastructure. And the less communication, the more we see that there will be proposals coming out of that community of trust and safety that would have an impact on access and infrastructure of the internet that can hamper access, because it's all very much interrelated. So I think that this gap is worrisome. It can affect our access to encrypted services that is essential for security. It can also hamper access of people to essential properties of the internet. For example, it can be like IP blocking, or their domain names might be redacted. So basically, what I think these two communities should do is to talk to each other and see that these policies that come out of digital trust and safety and these great ideas do not hamper that access to the internet.
We need people to really understand what's going on, and that requires that, people get a little bit smart about how the internet really can work or cannot. At the Internet Society, we have provided a sort of analytic toolkit to try to help people understand the consequences of the various things that they might be proposing. We call this the Internet Impact Assessment Toolkit. So it's a little bit like, an environmental assessment when you're going to build a dam. Same thing, if you're going to dam the internet, you got to look at what the consequences are going to be. And we're trying very hard to build a coalition of all of the various groups online, but it is sometimes a lonely business because, we work around the world. There are a lot of governments around the world who are no longer interested in making sure that the internet is for everyone. They want to make sure that it's only for certain people. And we think that that's a terrible thing. There's a lot of cost to turning off the internet in your country. We've done some analysis on this, and those costs are borne by ordinary people.
There are essential properties of the internet that if you don't have access to, you cannot get online. You cannot have access to the global internet. And one of those is access to internet protocols. So internet protocols are the numbers that enable the devices to talk to each other. If the network operators and the devices don't have those numbers or don't share the same protocol, they cannot talk to each other. One of the risks that we see now, it has not happened. Internet fragmentation at technical layer has not happened yet. But one of the risks is that we kind of withdraw the IP addresses from certain devices or from certain network operators because of their nationality or because of, some kind of like sanctions that we discussed. If we do that, then the access of population that uses that network will be hampered. So they can't have access to the global internet as we know it. One of the things called them economic sanctions that now they are slowly impacting network operators' access to these IP addresses.
I'm not saying everything with GDPR has been perfect, and I think it should have been done in a much simpler way. Instead of asking users, can we collect information on you, there should just be rules and regulation what is acceptable collection and what is unacceptable. To me, it basically means if you need the data to provide the service, then okay, you can utilize the data as long as you keep it safe and don't use it for anything else, right? That's the basic principle. So you can't use it for marketing. In particular, you can't use it to profile users. I don't think this is too complicated, but I think there's a reluctance to go all the way because there's a concern that going too far will reduce the competitiveness of certain companies, or the argument that is being used, it will hold back technology. But in reality, when have you found that actually keeping monopolies safe is something that's good for progress and technology? Because what we are doing now is to keep monopolies, big tech, safe. And it isn't a question of equal access to data, it's basically reduced access to data for everyone.
We'll be back right after this.
Hackers and cybercriminals have always held this kind of special fascination.
Obviously, I can't tell you too much about what I do.
It's a game. Who's the best hacker? And I was like, well, this is child's play.
I'm Dina Temple-Raston, and on the Click Here podcast, you'll meet them and the people trying to stop them.
We're not afraid of the attack. We're afraid of the creativity and the intelligence of the human being behind it.
Click Here, stories about the people making and breaking our digital world.
AI machines. Satellite. Engine ignition.
Click here.
And liftoff.
Every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts.
If you take India as an example, I think I'm right in saying there are 22 official languages in India. And the majority of them do not use ASCII as their script. I am Sally Costerton. I'm the interim CEO and president of ICANN. Now, most of the internet access these days to today in the world is using, a lot of it is in English, but even if it's not in English, it uses the ASCII script. And that means if you don't use the ASCII script, which a lot of Indian languages don't, then it is much more difficult for you to get online because your keyboards, which might be in your local script, those email addresses, those online subscriptions, your e-governance tools and so forth don't necessarily recognize the script. And so a key part of that is what we call universal acceptance, which is a fairly straightforward piece of coding that e-commerce, anybody who's running a digital platform or an email server needs to make sure that their service is universally accessible. ICANN is by no means the only player in this. It's a big global initiative. A lot of it is to do with big email providers and big e-commerce providers. So we're doing our piece to raise awareness of it. So that's a critical part of digital inclusion, is making sure that those scripts, those non-ASCII, those non-English languages can be accepted in a singular way so that we have anybody, wherever they live in the world, should have the ability to access the single global internet. They should not be marginalized because they don't speak a language or they don't use a script. So universal acceptance is very important for that.
I mean, when we were starting, I think people didn't really see where things were going, and they were saying, okay, it's going to be on machines and it's all going to be in English. And from the very beginning, we were saying, no, it's going to be in local languages and it's going to be on all kinds of devices, including mobile phones and televisions and in your car, on your fridge, and the like. And then you have the Internet of Things. Now, the Internet of Things hasn't gone the way it should, right? The Internet of Things has not been based on standards. So the idea that we had when I was working at Opera was to actually provide solutions so you could have the Internet of Things standardized. the World Wide Web Consortium is working on that. So I think it's important that we engage and get this standardized. But what maybe we didn't see in the early days is this concept of surveillance economy. And I think none of us was seeing that anyone would think it would be okay to collect the level of data that we are seeing. And that's clearly something that has gone wrong, where certain companies have basically taken liberties that they never should have taken, and they should have been stopped a long time ago. So that's the dark side, and I think that's kind of where we see certain issues that need to be resolved.
One thing that I'm very excited about is this project that we received some funding for that is about DNS resolvers. So when you go to a website, in order to give you access to that website, the operators need to use a DNS resolver. DNS resolver providers are becoming very much consolidated, and that can lead to censorship. Also, like decentralized nature of the internet is very important, because that is how we make it global, and that is how we kind of make it shutdown proof. One of the things that we are going to work on is to look at the reasons behind why this small but very important function of the internet has become centralized. And that centralization in the DNS resolver space and the cloud space is very much something that we need to monitor. The other thing that the Americans might ask to say, well, maybe centralization is not such a bad thing. Centralization, of course, brings more security in some instances, because like companies have more capital to protect the infrastructure. But then decentralization brings that access. That is very important. Access of people and communities that can't easily have access to these centralized systems. For example, if the network operators in some areas that there are like vulnerable communities, if these network operators cannot connect to something like Cloudflare or popular DNS resolvers, it would be great if we can help them to adopt their own DNS resolver to connect people to it.
There are internationalized domain names. They've existed for a long time, and it's something that ICANN has been pioneering for many years. They're top-level domains, accessible in 37 languages and 23 scripts, and they've been delegated into the root zone. So they do exist. What we will be doing at the end of the spring in 2026 is opening our next round of top-level domains. And they are, so this is things like, .org, .com, but also in 2012, we had a round where we had another 1,500 top-level domains be put in the root. So things like .Christmas, lots of cities and countries applied for names, and it widened up the top level domain name, which is part of ICANN's mission. And we will focus this time on countries where we've got scripts and special languages. And so we will be targeting a lot of our work at encouraging people to apply for those top level domains, particularly in that part of the world where people may not yet have benefited from the opportunity to start a new business, or to draw attention to their city or their clubs and societies or wherever it might be, because they need access to dedicated scripts, or they're just not aware of it.
I think those are some of the more important things. I'm very excited about a lot of the things that are going to be happening in the future. Again, we are seeing the internet get into cars. That's exciting for us as a company because we are part of that. But it is also part of this getting internet everywhere. And I think the Internet of Things is really exciting. I would like to see that utilizing open standards, so we actually have interoperability between all the devices and not locked in silos. I think that's something that we want to work for. I'm excited about the Fediverse and the idea of things like Mastodon and the like, where you have a distributed social networks and the like. So instead of having everything controlled by big tech, that you actually can have just even individuals setting up their own servers which are connected to other servers. I think there's a beauty to that, and that's more in line with the internet as I know it and how it is supposed to work. So there is the potential of basically getting things back on track. And I think for a lot of us, if we engage in and join those new services, which are not controlled by big tech, but rather by institutions and individuals, I think that's a very good place to go.
This episode was produced by me and Emma Silikans and mixed by Garrett Lang, with original music from him and Jacob Gorski. Thanks for listening. I'm Jennifer Strong.
From PRX.